Everyone is panicking about Iran mining Kharg Island and the Strait of Hormuz, calling it the ultimate trap for the global economy. But what if I told you the US military actually wants them to focus their entire defense strategy precisely on that specific area? While YouTube armchair generals are hyperventilating about a massive naval sweep in body bags, the reality is completely different. The US has silently shifted to a brutal economic and electronic warfare chokehold that is turning Iran's trap against itself right now. Let's decode the classified reality of Operation Hormuz and expose what the mainstream networks like CNN are terrified to tell you today. They have covered the critical 21-mile-long strait with a dense network of sea mines hidden carefully beneath the dark surface. The entire coastline of Kharg Island has been laced with deadly booby traps and explosive-laden suicide boats patrolling the deep waters. The purpose of this psychological barrier was simple, because no global navy would dare to enter this layered and ruthless underwater maze. However, Iran appears to have made a major mistake because Washington did not back down and instead activated a terrifying new scenario. The massive picture emerging on the horizon with tens of thousands of soldiers is actually a brilliant diversion for a hidden operation. True Pentagon OPSEC means the real crippling blow will be delivered by advanced electronic attack platforms operating high above the clouds. The Iranian regime is preparing for a bloody beach landing, while the American military prepares to systematically fry their entire grid. Iran truly believes they have successfully established an impenetrable A2AD bubble over the strait with their boats and mines. They rely heavily on explosive, laden-fast attack craft and underwater naval mines to create a layered defense system in the Gulf. However, the Pentagon is not foolish enough to send tens of thousands of American troops into a million-man meat grinder on the sand. The mainstream media continues to broadcast the terrifying idea of a massive amphibious assault using traditional Marine battalions. All those visible troop deployments and massive warships moving into the region are actually part of a highly calculated distraction. True operational security dictates that the most lethal actions must remain completely hidden from both the enemy and the global press. We are no longer fighting in the bloody eras of World War II, where victory required brave men storming heavily fortified enemy beaches. The entire Iranian coastal defense grid is eagerly waiting for a conventional fight that the American military has no intention of giving. The ultimate goal is to bypass their conventional traps entirely and strike them where their physical fortifications are absolutely useless. Therefore, the imposing presence of the 82nd Airborne Division and the amphibious assault ships serves primarily as a grand theatrical show. The leadership in Tehran is celebrating their seemingly perfect defensive strategy without realizing they have already been outplayed. They spent decades building a fortress for a specific type of war that the modern American military establishment has completely abandoned. Their immense investment in coastal artillery and swarm boats will ultimately become a monument to their profound strategic miscalculation. While everyone is desperately looking at the boots on the ground, the actual warriors are preparing to strike from the shadows above them. Forget the chaotic deployment of 50,000 conventional troops and heavy armored divisions storming the sandy beaches. If any American forces are currently operating on the ground in that region, they are highly classified, Tier 1 operators. These elite and completely invisible units are not there to engage in massive firefights with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Instead, they are stealthily embedded deep within enemy territory, functioning as the ultimate unseen eyes of the Pentagon. Small teams of Force Recon Marines are already silently painting critical strategic targets for overhead bomber squadrons. They use advanced laser designation equipment to illuminate hidden missile silos and coastal batteries with absolute precision. This invisible battlefield is designed to completely dismantle the Iranian defensive network without a single physical clash. The most devastating and crippling strikes of this entire asymmetric operation will occur in absolute and terrifying silence. In fact, the true crippling blow will happen long before the Iranian forces can even manage to power up their aging radar systems. Those dense minefields and suicide boats in the strait are entirely useless against an adversary they cannot even detect or see. The real war is being quietly orchestrated by ghost units directing apocalyptic firepower from thousands of feet in the air. This is the absolute pinnacle of modern asymmetric proxy warfare, where the physical presence of massive armies is totally obsolete. Every single fortified bunker and underground command center is currently being mapped and locked by these invisible spotters. They are setting the stage for a spectacular display of aerial dominance that will rewrite the rules of modern military strategy. The cornerstone of this silent destruction is the deployment of highly advanced electronic attack platforms operating in the region. Aircraft like the formidable EA-18G Growler do not rely on traditional explosive munitions to completely neutralize an enemy threat. Instead, they are equipped with sophisticated, high-frequency microwave weapons designed to engage multiple targets simultaneously. Iran heavily relies on massive drone swarms to overwhelm naval defenses by attacking from multiple unpredictable vectors at once. However, these autonomous swarms are rendered entirely useless against next-gen electronic attack platforms patrolling the skies. A single well-placed microwave burst can instantly fry the delicate circuitry of dozens of incoming drones in mere milliseconds. The sky will quite literally rain down burning plastic and molten wiring without a single American interceptor missile being fired. This invisible electromagnetic dome effectively turns the airspace over the Persian Gulf into an absolute death trap for Iranian tech. Furthermore, their advanced coastal missile guidance systems are equally vulnerable to these overwhelming electromagnetic payloads. When the operators pull the trigger, the Iranian anti-ship batteries will simply go dark as their computer systems are completely erased. There will be no warning sirens or flashing radar contacts, indicating that a massive aerial strike is currently obliterating their defenses. The Revolutionary Guard commanders will stare at blank screens while their most prized and expensive weapons are quietly rendered impotent. This is the horrifying reality of an asymmetric technological war where raw firepower is fundamentally replaced by pure, invisible dominance. The ultimate execution of this massive asymmetric strategy heavily relies on the terrifying payload of American strategic bombers. The legendary B-52 Stratofortress is fully prepared to deliver what military insiders ominously call the candles from hell. Operating alongside them is the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, which can easily penetrate deep into Iranian airspace undetected. These massive bombing platforms do not operate alone because they are constantly guided by elite squadrons of F-35 fighter jets. The F-35 is not merely a traditional fighter but a flying command center capable of tracking thousands of targets simultaneously. They gather immense amounts of battlefield data and feed those precise firing coordinates directly to the heavy bombers overhead. This specific network has been heavily upgraded using lethal drone-killing tactics recently perfected on the battlefields of Ukraine. American forces closely studied the Russian use of Iranian drones in Eastern Europe and developed perfectly tailored countermeasures. They know exactly how these specific autonomous weapons maneuver and have programmed their systems to eliminate them automatically. This unparalleled combination of stealth technology and overwhelming aerial supremacy ensures absolute destruction from above. Any Iranian attempt to launch a coordinated swarm attack will be instantly met with a barrage of advanced beyond visual range missiles. The entire airspace over the Persian Gulf will be completely sanitized by American pilots operating safely outside the enemy radar range. The devastating capabilities of the U.S. Space Command represent another invisible layer of this complex asymmetric warfare strategy. Iran heavily depends on crucial satellite intelligence feeds provided by their strategic allies in Russia and the Chinese government. However, the American military has deployed orbital assets designed specifically to intercept and nullify those foreign data streams. This high-tech intervention essentially blinds the Iranian commanders by severing their reliable connection to the outside world. The immediate consequence of this orbital blackout is the total operational collapse of their extensive asymmetric proxy warfare network. Militant groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis rely on this exact satellite data to coordinate their long-range missile and drone strikes. Without these electronic eyes in the sky, those proxy forces are reduced to firing their advanced weapons blindly into the empty desert. No amount of heavily armed Marines or assault ships could achieve this level of strategic paralysis against a global proxy network. The Pentagon knows that controlling the electromagnetic spectrum from space is far more lethal than capturing a small sandy island. This silent war in orbit guarantees that any regional uprising orchestrated by Tehran is neutralized before it even truly begins. Mainstream analysts completely miss this orbital dominance because they are too obsessed with counting physical boots on the ground. We are witnessing a revolutionary shift, where the most consequential battles of our time are fought in silence, high above the earth. Instead of clearing thousands of dangerous mines in the narrow strait, the US has a completely bloodless alternative ready to deploy. The grand military strategy involves initiating a massive naval blockade far away in the deep and unrestricted waters of the Indian Ocean. By intercepting and seizing massive Iranian oil tankers in international waters, they can effectively recreate the proven Venezuela model. This brilliant asymmetric strangulation tactic starves the isolated regime of crucial oil revenue without firing a shot at their mainland. The heavily armed Iranian fast attack boats and coastal defense missiles are essentially useless thousands of miles from their home shores. American destroyers can easily stop these vulnerable commercial vessels while operating safely outside the terrifying enemy, a 2 AD bubble. The Pentagon completely bypasses the entire heavily fortified coastline, making the monumental Iranian military investment totally irrelevant. This is how a true superpower fights, by forcing the enemy to watch their vital economic lifeline bleed dry from an untouchable distance. They built an incredibly expensive fortress in the Persian Gulf, but the real devastating siege is happening far beyond their limited reach. Iran must now face the reality that their ultimate deadly trap was entirely ignored by an adversary thinking several massive steps ahead. The global economy will undoubtedly feel the ripple effects, but American troops will never be sacrificed to achieve this strategic victory. Let us take a moment to address the very real and valid fears that many of you are expressing in the comments section right now. You are absolutely right to be terrified of a massive ground invasion, because sending our boys into the meat grinder is a disaster. We have seen the devastating human cost of prolonged desert warfare, and nobody wants to see thousands of American body bags returning. That is exactly why relying on absolute aerial and naval supremacy is the only intelligent way to handle this unprecedented crisis. The smartest and most patriotic military strategy is the one that completely destroys the enemy while protecting American lives. Mainstream politicians might carelessly demand a full-scale invasion, but the real military strategists know how to fight intelligently. Iran desperately wants us to bleed in the sand because they know they cannot ever reach our stealth bombers high above the clouds. This new asymmetric approach perfectly aligns with an America First mentality by prioritizing the ultimate safety of our armed forces. Our true national strength does not come from throwing massive numbers of infantrymen at heavily fortified coastal defense lines. It comes from unleashing the full, terrifying power of our advanced technological superiority to break their will without shedding blood. Any actual veteran watching this video knows that minimizing friendly casualties is the absolute highest priority in any engagement. So do not let the sensationalist news networks convince you that we are marching directly into a foolish and bloody historical trap. We must fundamentally redefine the true strategic meaning behind the 10-day suspension of attacks announced by the current administration. The mainstream media completely misinterpreted this specific countdown as a desperate diplomatic window for peaceful nuclear negotiations. In reality, this incredibly tense waiting period allows the Pentagon to perfectly calibrate their comprehensive electronic suppression grid. Positioning advanced orbital assets and high-frequency microwave platforms into their optimal firing vectors requires exact coordination. Once this deceptive 10-day clock finally expires, the subsequent 24 hours will introduce a totally new era of modern combat. We will witness the terrifying vaporization of the entire Iranian communications network without a single, loud, conventional explosion. By the end of the 48-hour mark, the supposedly impenetrable defensive bubble over the Persian Gulf will be absolutely paralyzed. The Revolutionary Guard commanders will suddenly realize that their massive coastal fortresses are completely blind and entirely useless. This absolute electromagnetic silence will beautifully pave the way for the distant naval blockade to slowly choke the rogue nation dry. Those massive infantry battalions sitting patiently in staging areas will simply watch this digital execution from a safe distance. The much-discussed diplomatic pause was never about preventing war, but rather about guaranteeing an absolutely flawless asymmetric victory. If the distant naval blockade succeeds in cutting off the vital Iranian oil flow, their entire domestic economy will instantly collapse. The radical regime in Tehran fundamentally relies on that continuous crude export revenue to effectively fund their expensive military. When those massive oil tankers are permanently halted in the Indian Ocean, the brutal war machine driving their proxy network stops cold. The immediate financial devastation will quickly trigger massive internal instability across the deeply fractured and struggling country. We are talking about an unprecedented economic disaster that will systematically dismantle their dangerous government from the inside out. Global energy markets will undoubtedly experience temporary shockwaves as international oil prices surge past the catastrophic 100 mark. However, this immediate financial pain is a calculated sacrifice designed to completely avoid a devastating global military conflict overall. European and Asian markets, heavily dependent on imported energy, must find alternative suppliers to survive this massive geopolitical shift. Meanwhile, the isolated Iranian leadership will desperately beg their supposed allies in Moscow and Beijing for immediate financial rescue. Both the Russian and Chinese governments will quietly refuse direct intervention because they fear the overwhelming American naval response. This absolute diplomatic isolation, combined with a totally paralyzed electronic grid, leaves the ruling clerics with no functional options. They will be trapped in their own useless coastal fortresses, while the world slowly moves on without their vital petroleum energy exports. This brilliant masterclass in warfare proves that true modern dominance is achieved through economic starvation and technical superiority. The terrifying deployment of high-frequency microwave platforms ensures that the American military remains completely untouchable in the sky. We are witnessing the birth of a totally new tactical doctrine that makes conventional amphibious beach landings look like ancient history. The Pentagon has successfully turned the dreaded Strait of Hormuz into a meaningless geographical feature without firing a single bullet. Every single dollar the Revolutionary Guard wasted on those massive coastal defense batteries has been completely and utterly neutralized. Now it is time to carefully evaluate the broader geopolitical implications of this invisible and highly sophisticated electromagnetic siege. This paradigm shift in global warfare will undeniably force every single major power to completely rethink their future defense strategies. Nations relying heavily on outdated troop formations will find themselves completely defenseless against these invisible orbital strikes. The future of military conflict is no longer dictated by the sheer number of soldiers you can physically deploy onto a given battlefield. It is governed entirely by who controls the unseen electromagnetic spectrum and who can effectively manipulate vital global trade routes. We are entering a volatile era where the most devastating military weapons are the ones you will never actually see or hear approaching. So I leave this massive geopolitical question to you, and I want to hear your highly detailed tactical assessment in the comments down below. Is the US military intentionally holding back its ultimate electronic warfare capabilities to effectively avoid a wider regional conflict? Or is the Pentagon blindly playing right into a massive trap cleverly set by Russia and China to slowly drain critical American resources?